today we are going to look at the Tower of Babel, and we're going through Genesis. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 10 and 11, and again I'm going to kind of be doing an overview because I've been trying to cover a lot, buzzing along here through this, and this is going to be the last message I'm going to do in Genesis for a little while, just because it's so deep and it's so much like, and even today, this may be the king of complicated messages, and I was like, I don't think it is. I've said that before, and I think other times I was correct. But it's deep, complicated things that I feel like the Old Testament is like this series of puzzles that you have to put together. And I just feel like I do want to return to this, but I want to step away and just focus on very practical things for a little while, just because I don't want to just continually be loading you with this deep stuff and not be giving you the opportunity for growth at times too. So I want to try and mix things up. But anyway, suffer through this and we'll get easier. But anyway, so we're looking at the Tower of Babel mostly today, but in Genesis 10:1, the people are beginning to disperse across the earth after the flood, and it says in verse 1, it says, "These are the generations of Noah, of Noah's sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth." And it says the sons that were born to them after the flood. So it begins to list all of the genealogy, and once again, I'm going to buzz through genealogy. There's a ton of genealogy in this chapter. It's probably mostly. But it says that the sons of Japheth, and then it lists, he has these children, and then one of these sons has these children, and it kind of, branches out like a family tree, but it doesn't follow all of them. It follows certain ones and gives a certain layout for what people go where. And then it goes to the next son, and it talks about Ham and the sons that he has, and so on. In verse 5, there's this interesting thing, though, that I want to point out. And it says there's these 4 children. It says from these come the coastland people. And it says that they spread across the land, each with his own language, according to his own clan, and his own and their own culture, their own nation. And so you may think it's interesting and like, okay, this is before God separates everyone's language, but it says they go out and they spread out, each with their own language and with their own culture, with their own clans. And you're like, well, how do they have their own language already? And this may just be something that would stand out to you as we get to the next chapter and when God divides their language. But I think we're going to see, my opinion is in the next chapter, that he backs up. So he just flies through. Remember in Genesis, we went through all creation, and then Moses backed up and he talked about some of the details. He goes back and he says, in the day when God did this. And I think that this is what he's going to do again. He's going to kind of fly through, and then he's going to go back and talk about, this is my opinion of what happens, is he goes back and talks about when he separates their language. So anyway, here's an interesting thing. In verse 8, it says that this was a son of Ham, but Cush. And it says he fathered Nimrod, who was the first mighty man on the earth. And you're like, what is that? Like, what does he mean by the first mighty man on the earth? And once again, I tell you, there's some puzzling things here. There's, oh man, I don't even want to conspiracize about what this could be. I think of in 2 Peter, Peter talks about the mighty men, the men of renown on the face of the earth, and he talks about possibly that they had got into demonic things in order to achieve these things, which is a little bit crazy, and I'm not even going to go into that. But then again, maybe he's just a normal person, because listen to what it says about Nimrod. He says that he was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter. So you're like, okay, maybe he's just a mighty hunter. Maybe that's all there is to it. But then there's this interesting thing. He seems to be like this huge king that is like king over all the land. He's very powerful over people as well. And it says that the beginning of his kingdom, in verse 10, it says the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, which is interesting because this is the people that God was not really that pleased with. He ends up kind of like smashing them and dispersing them across the earth. So Nimrod, he's king of all these lands, and it starts with Babel, which we're going to see a lot more on in the next chapter. So anyway, it says that, and another thing about Nimrod, it says that in between 2 of the cities that he ruled, it says between Nineveh and I'm probably going to pronounce this right, but Kala was the great city. It says that he had this massive city that was just this epic that was known as this great city. So he's a king over all of this land, and he's got just a massive empire that Nimrod is running. And once again, I don't even know why, but if you heard the name Nimrod, it usually has bad connotation nowadays. It's not a good thing. If somebody calls you Nimrod, they don't mean that you shot a deer. They mean that you're not a foolish person. But anyway, we're going to skip on to chapter 11 here, because the rest of that chapter is just genealogy. All these people had these people, and these had people had these people, and I'm going to try and tie in. And like I said, suffer through the complication, and we'll get easier next week. But the beginning of chapter 11 says this. It says, the whole earth had one language and the same words. And you're like, wait a minute, didn't we just hear how they had their own languages where they went in their own areas? But I think possibly he's backing up, because he says this. He says in verse 2, and people migrated from the east. And it says that when they found the plains in the land of Shinar, they settled there. And we're going to see that Shinar eventually changes their name to Babel. So we saw before that they went and they settled in the land of Babel, so it's very possible that he's backing up and he's saying, okay, when the people were traveling and they're settling in these lands, they settled in this land that will one day be known as Babel, but is right now known as Shinar. And it says, they said to each other, they said, come, let us make all these bricks and build all this city. And it says, in verse 4, it says, come, let us build a great city. And they says, with a tower, with its top in the heavens. And they said, let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the entire earth. So they're like, okay, let's build this great city. Let's just build this wonderful city. And in the middle of this city, let's make this tower that reaches up into the heavens. And you ask, well, why did God get so upset about this? What is wrong with making a tower that reaches into the heavens? Like, is it wrong to build a tall building? Is God upset with that? So this is where the conspiracy comes in, okay? And this is why I say, I don't like teaching on things that are difficult for long periods of time. But one thing that really there seems to be a lot of little things that point to the idea that maybe in this middle of the city, if you're going to have one place, kind of like a tower or maybe a pyramid or maybe this thing that's reaching up into the heavens, why are you reaching up into the heavens? And if you just study culture, we've been to Chichen Itza or whatever, I probably pronounced that wrong, but when you see generally, and I'm not saying this is matter of fact for Tower of Babel, but generally when you see a tower that is reaching up towards heaven, many times they go there and they sacrifice people on the top of the tower in this disgusting, they even have these pictures on the towers if you go look at them, and they're of human sacrifice. And what are they doing up there? They're reaching for gods. They're like, if you would see me, you think of the pyramids. And they're like, if we could be recognized by the gods, and Pharaoh would be put in here, and all of this is so that the gods can see me and see who I am, and it's not the true God, right? So generally when you see a pyramid that is built to reach into heaven, they're probably not so foolish as to think, oh, we'll get all the way to the stars and through them. That's probably not what they're thinking. And I don't want to say this matter-of-factly, but it's very, in my mind, very likely that it's built on paganism, that God is not happy with it because, oh, they built a big tower. He's unhappy with it because of the intent of why they're building this tower. So also, if you think about this, there's some other things that maybe parallel this. Eden in Ezekiel, he calls it the mount. It's a place where it's like a mount. And why would you say that? Well, one thing that comes to mind is it is where God met with man, right? And so you're like, well, maybe a high place. And you hear this all through the Old Testament. You hear on a high place, or when on a high place where God, kind of like heaven meets earth, even though you're nowhere near it, you're nowhere close to it. You think of Abraham offering Isaac on a mountain. It's it's not a big mount, but why the connection with a small hill? You think of the mount in Jerusalem where the Lord would return. And you're like, well, it's just a small hill, but yet the symbolic nature is that where heaven and earth meet. Another thing would be like Mount Sinai, where God comes down to the top of the mountain. It's not like we're that close to God. It means nothing. It's just like a hill, but yet it's where heaven and earth kind of connect because God has chosen to show it in that way, right? Or when Moses goes up the mount over and over to speak to God. Does God need a little hill to speak? No, but many times the purpose of a tower, or the purpose of building up towards the sky is just because you have this idea in your head that I can reach the gods and they will see me. And I think that we'll maybe see this in here, that they are reaching for false gods. And I think maybe there's some Old Testament passages that might show us this. So in verse 5, it says that God came down to see the tower that man had built. And it says, the Lord said, behold, he says, the people, he says, there are one people with one language. And he says, this is only the beginning of what they will do. And he says, and nothing will be, he says, nothing that they propose to do will be impossible for them. So you ask again, is God just upset with technology? Is he like, oh, you know what? If these people build a tower, have a nice city, like, I need to destroy them because I'm against technology. Like, that seems a little off, right? Like, what are we missing here that he is against? But one thing about this is that word propose, nothing that they propose to do. This is the Hebrew translation of that word. It says usually in a bad sense, to consider, to devise, to imagine, to plot, to presume, and to think of evil. So they are, I think, in my mind, God is like, you know what? This is the beginning of evil, and they are going to just become disgusting in my mind. I think that that's probably way more likely than God saying, oh no, they're building a tall building, which, like I say, I can't tell you for absolute fact of that matter, but this is what in my mind I would say most likely. And once again, I can't say matter of fact, but it seems to me that God thinks, oh, they're getting into filth and disgust, and they're going to do awful things, and I just need to stop this. It's a bad scenario that's taking place. And it says that the Lord came down in verse 7, and he says he confused their language. And he says they may not understand one another's speech. And he says he dispersed them over the face of the entire earth. And he says, and they left off building the city. So now, what is this about? Right? And this is where the Old Testament is difficult. You look at a story and you're like, okay, right? That's how I think. This is why it's so difficult to teach from the Old Testament, because I'm like, all right, what do we take from this? What are we supposed to learn? Why did God do this? So this is, now once again, I'm going to bring out some things that I think are pretty clear and matter of fact, and I'm also going to bring out some things that a lot of people speculate on this matter, okay? And I don't say that I said, I'm just saying, I think it's possible, and I'll show you why, but I think it's possible that this was God setting up a way to show that he is God over all other gods. And I think that this is maybe what happened. And I think, and I'll show you why I think it's possible that God wanted to use this event in order to split people up in all of these groups and in a way give them their own God. So that, remember, through all the Old Testament, God is saying, look, I'm greater than their God, and I'm greater than their God, and I'm greater than their God, and I'm greater than their God. And so God kind of sets this up in this format that to show I am greater than all other gods. And it's a pattern that flows through, and this seems to be the pinnacle that he uses to set up the situation. Now, so this is interesting. It says in verse 8, it says, the Lord dispersed them over the face of the earth, and they left off building the city. And the next genealogy shows how they divide into 70 groups of people, okay? So, once again, this is complicated, okay? But they divide into 70 groups of people. And then listen to what Deuteronomy 32:8 says. It says, when the Lord Most High gave the nations their inheritance, and he says when he divided mankind, it says that when he fixed the borders of the people according to the number of the sons of God. So you're like, according to the number of the sons of God? What is this, like 70 sons of God? Or like, what who are these people and who are the number of the sons of God that you divided them? It's like you divided them into like 70 peoples that are these, who knows, and I'm going to give you some thoughts, but sons of God. Like, what are they? Why did you do this? What is your point? And then he says, but the Lord said his portion was Jacob, and his heritage would be Israel through Jacob. So God is like, I'm going to divide them all up. So you got 70 groups of people, and I'm only taking one for myself. One little piece of pie. This will be my people. I'm God of these people. And all of the people will look at me and say, the God of Israel, how great is he, right? So he divides them, and he only takes one of them, a small portion, a 70th of the people. And it says that he took them as his heritage. And so I want to look here at this number 70. Now, once again, I hate teaching super speculatively. But where else do we see the number 70? And you see that God uses the number 70 many times in a council, like a group of people that would kind of rule things. Like if you had the Sanhedrin and you appointed 70 as rulers, right? Or if you had Moses. Moses is like, it's hard to rule all the people. And God says, appoint 70 people who will be your helpers. And they will kind of rule with you, that they would be judges with you. And you see this number 70 as if it's kind of like a council of judges around you, which is maybe a pattern that we might see. But as we're looking at this, here's the big speculation. I'm just going to throw it out there. Was that God had a council of 70 people, which would be referred to as Elohim, okay? They would be like angels that helped him rule. Now, they were nothing like him. They were nothing like God. But many people think that when Satan fell, they fell with. So that they were now demonic, that they were false gods, that they were evil gods, and God let them, so to speak, he let them kind of be over the nations. Now, there's a lot of speculation to that, a lot of unknown to that. But listen to what this says here in Psalm 82:6. He says, I have said that you are gods of the Most High, all of you. He says, nevertheless, you shall die like men and like any prince. And he says, arise, O God, and judge the earth, for you shall inherit the nations. So in this psalm, it seems to say that God is going to judge the earth, and he's going to take back the nations. And he says he's going to judge the sons of God. And he says he's going to redeem all the peoples that it seems he has spread out. And you would say maybe these sons of God are not fallen angels. Maybe they're just people. Jesus even seems to make a reference to this referring to many maybe people on earth. It's very complicated, and that's why I say, I'll get through the peak of complicated, and then we'll take a break. But it also says here in Psalm 89:5, he says, let the heavens praise you, O Lord, and fear, for you are a fearful God in the assembly of the holy ones. So he says, you are this God in the assembly of holy ones that are above them all. He says, you are higher than all. He says, who in the skies can be compared to you, O Lord? And he says, who among the heavenly beings is like you, Lord? And he says, a God greatly to be feared in the council of the holy ones. So it seems that maybe there is a possible council of holy ones that he maybe, possibly, would have appointed over the nations. And you think of, even when you think of the false gods of the nations, you think of Egypt or something. They definitely had some power. Because remember, Moses goes to them and he throws down his staff and it becomes a serpent. And they come out and they throw down their staffs and they become serpents. But Moses' staff eats their staffs, right? So it's like, okay, they have a God with power, demonic power, but it is not like the God, okay? And so this is where a lot of this thought comes in, that it seems that the other gods, the gods of the peoples, God wanted to prove that I am above them. I am greater than all other gods, and that he maybe would let some demonic power rule over the nations. And so it says this in Isaiah 24:21. He says this, on that day I will punish the host of heaven. And he says, and the kings of the earth. So God says, I have appointed a day to punish the angels of heaven And he says, and the kings of the earth. And you're like, okay, there is a certain amount of the hosts of heaven who have fallen into sin, who God has let fall to earth to be a demonic false god that people can reach out to do bad things. But God is going to punish them. And so this in Deuteronomy 32:8, and I know I'm kind of skipping along because I don't know if this is all that applicable. But in Deuteronomy 32:8, he says, when the Most High gave to the nations, and we looked at this once, their inheritance, he says, when he divided mankind, when he set its borders according to the numbers of the sons of God, and then he took his portion that was Israel. I think kind of what I want to do is kind of close with this idea. And that is that I cannot tell you if maybe God divided the nations according to human leaders. Maybe it was merely human leaders, okay? Maybe it was some demonic leaders. I don't know. There's a lot of passages on this that hint at it being greater than human. But I don't know. Ultimately, should we care? I see so many people get into this sort of thing, and they get in so deep that they're just obsessed with it. But it really doesn't matter all that much in my mind. It's fine to look at, it's fine to try to understand. But I think this is the main thing that I want to close with. I want to close with the general idea. And that is that God had divided the nations seemingly by 70, and he'd only taken one for himself. And the key factor that he used was language. It divided them up, that they're all different languages and different people, right? So now God is only the God of these people, so to speak, unless they come to him from the other false gods of the nations to worship the true God, okay? So that seems to be established. Whether or not this demonic stuff is established, I don't really know or care. But this is what it says in Zephaniah 3:9. It says, for at that time I will change the speech of the people, that they will all have one pure speech, that they all may call upon the name of the Lord. And it says that they may serve me in one accord. God is like, I've appointed a day when I will make all the languages one so that they are pure, and all people may call upon the name of the Lord. This seems to insinuate that God is going to be greater and bigger than all other gods of the world, that he will wipe them out and he will give a pure speech, that they will be all his people, not spread out and not dispersed. He's going to reverse what he had done there. He's going to prove that he is God above all else and take them all back in maybe just to flex his muscles, to show I am God over heaven and I am God over earth. And I think that this is something that we could definitely see in this. And this is what I've been accused of closing many times, okay, right? But this is truly what I'm going to try and close with. In Acts 2:4, it says this, that they were all filled with the Holy Spirit. And it says they began to speak in other tongues. And it says, as the Spirit gave them utterance. And it says, now they're dwelling in Jerusalem, many Jews, devout men of God from every nation under heaven. So here you have all the nations, every nation under heaven. How many is that? All of them. They've all come together to one place. And all of a sudden, people are speaking in a language that's unified. And it says this. It says, and at the sound of the multitudes, the people came together and they were bewildered. And they said, because each one was hearing in his own language. And it says, and they were amazed and astonished, saying, are not all who are here, are they not all Galileans? And they were like, what is going on? How come our speech is unified? How come we can all hear one another? This is crazy. What is going on? And then it says here in verse 8, it says, and how is it that each of one of us hears in our own language? And then it goes on to list all the people groups who had come. And he lists all these people who had come from all of these groups where God had dispersed them at the Tower of Babel. And now here they are, after Jesus Christ, Satan has made his attack, and Jesus Christ has defeated him. Christ is risen from the dead, and he is seated on the throne as Lord of all, and all of a sudden, all these people groups who are dispersed in their own language are like, how did we all come together, and how do we all speak the same language? This is crazy. Now, I do believe that the Old Testament is also referring in Zephaniah that one day we probably will all have one language in heaven, or however, at the end of at the end of time, we'll probably have one language. But I think that what happened here, in my mind, although it's very, very difficult, I believe that God set up the people to seek pagan worship. And then he shot them across the face of the earth and says, tell you what, I'll take one little slice, and through that slice, I'll redeem them all, and I will conquer heaven and earth. And there's so many passages that talk about we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but principalities and powers and darkness and evil. And the Bible says that Jesus has defeated them all, and he's become king and Lord over all. And I think what we see when the languages come back together is that God has maybe done something beyond our vision, that even the heavenly things and the earthly things, he's conquered them all, and he has become the God who is God over gods. You know, he says, you are all gods, but you shall die like men. He's like, you may be angelic, and that word gods is small g, Elohim, or ruling angels, or whatever it may be, but he's like, let me show you one God who's greater than any false god that could be. One God who's greater than the nations, and they will all be mine. I will be victorious and take them all. And that separating factor of language was brought back together to make them his and make them, to show what he had done. And, complicated. What a difficult passage. And once again, I am closing this up, but I hope that we see, if nothing else, that it's not that important to chase after all the super complicated, deep and dark things. And that's why next week I'm starting something very, very simple for a while to work on just our personal growth. But with that, it is cool to see the depths of what God does. He does these great things and these great wonders throughout the Bible, and he shows that he can separate language and he can bring them back together. And I think the point is that God is God over all, and that he will unify and he'll redeem the nations. He will make them his again. So let's go ahead and close in a word of prayer. Our God and Father, I just pray that you just help us. This is such a difficult text, and maybe there's not a lot to know for certain, the little finite details of it, or maybe there's certain things that we may not really understand, but we just thank you that you have divided the peoples and that you scattered them abroad, but yet you had a plan to bring them back together, that you had a plan to redeem the world, that you knew that you would bring all peoples to be unified together again, that you would show that you're greatest of all and that you're God over all. And I just thank you for your grand plan and the things that you have done, and that you cared about us, and that you redeemed us, and that you cared about all peoples, Lord. And I just thank you and praise you for the God that you are. And I pray this in your Son's name. Amen.